Hello and welcome, everyone. It's really good to see your faces. My name is Mei Ann Teo, and I am the producing artistic director of Musical Theater Factory. And I'm so grateful to Daniela and the whole team at Rattlestick for bringing us together to discuss the financial impact on the theater here in this time. How courageous all of us are to show up to this and how necessary in order to do so. I just want to say that this is one of a series of powerful conversations. It is a beautiful way to sort of begin a conversation. We definitely won't cover or solve anything, but how can we sort of be together with folks from different perspectives in order to sort of find some hope, perhaps. And when I say hope, I mean in the way that Rebecca Solnit says hope, which is hope is not clutching a lottery ticket in the burning house, but hope is the axe to break down the burning house, the door, and get through. So may that be a blessing upon our time together. So what we're going to do is another thing that we'll do is we'll gather around powerful texts of the theater, and we have incredible actors to read those. And so even in this virtual space, we can gather around the theater as a way of finding resilience and survival. Mei Ann, I use she and they pronouns. And the perspective that I sort of bring to this is as an artistic director, I'm thinking about institutions. I'm thinking about the ways in which small institutions can survive during this time, especially those who have to pay rent and who are reliant on contributed income. I'm also coming to this as a freelance director whose projects pretty much shuttered down from the moment of March 12, like many people, and wondering about what happens next. As a freelance theater director. And I'm also speaking as a daughter whose both parents got COVID-19 in Singapore, and that's why I'm home. And I flew back at the end of March immediately because I knew I couldn't be separated from my parents at this time when they were both in the hospital. And so I watch it with a global perspective of what's happening in Singapore, and I watch it as a daughter who is so grateful that her parents are okay now. And I'm also someone who, from the very beginning, I thought to myself, I don't want to be in panic or delusion. And so neither panic nor delusion. So how do we, where can we be from that? And I'm so excited to have our panelists introduce themselves, because I'm so excited for us to move towards that hope together, the axe. So I'd love, Jason, for you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mei Ann, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Benowitz. My pronouns are he, him, his. And I'm not a theater expert, but I do have some expertise on the economy and the capital markets. I'm a senior portfolio manager at Roosevelt Investments, where I've been for 10 years. And as my basic day job is to invest in stocks and bonds on behalf of our clients. And in order to do that, I think about the global macroeconomy and the capital markets, and I also analyze specific companies. I just want to share with you some general thoughts on the economy, because what we've seen this year, of course, is unprecedented. The decline was swift and deep, and you can measure this in terms of the amount of people that have lost their jobs. It's staggering, over 30 million in the United States in just the last 6 weeks or so. But what I found that it's important to keep in mind through this is that it's not forever. So the lockdown economy that we're all living in today will not last forever. It's going to open up. And when it opens up, things will get better. And therefore, what I've been focused on at my job in terms of thinking about the future is how much fiscal and monetary stimulus has been deployed by the government, and if that will be enough to sort of bridge us to the other side. Because when the economy reopens, what I expect to happen is for, the same way we're setting records now in terms of jobs lost, for jobs gained. As long as businesses can stay in business, and workers can stay attached to those businesses, we should see a pretty swift rebound. We won't get all the way back, but we can make meaningful progress, I think, before the year is out. And then I guess to take it closer to theater, when I think about what's most impacting the economy, every recession is different, And so the individuals and the types of companies that were most impacted this time are different than before. And one example is that this is, I think, the first time where in these sort of swift and rapid job losses, more women have lost jobs than men. So that's a little bit different. And then secondly, certainly the types of businesses are very different. So for example, travel and leisure has been most impacted, which is kind of unusual. And then, that's really sort of a broader category that includes, you could put performing arts in there, sports, concerts, and so on, where, there's two aspects that determine why it is that they're hit so hard that maybe we could talk about more. One would be just that, of course, they require large groups of people to come together, and therefore there seems to be more health and safety risk there. And the second is, the governments are telling us sort of what is essential and what is not. And in the near term, the essential things are things like grocery stores and pharmacies. But I think we would all agree that over a longer period of time, there's an essentialness to theater and performing arts that is important, and we'll have to get back to it at some point. So I'll stop there.
Jason, what's the one thing you hope this conversation will bring to us?
So I guess you had mentioned panic, and it was so important to me to sort of not panic as I was watching markets decline so rapidly, and I was getting phone calls from clients and people I work with professionally, and also folks that just know me and know that I'm an expert in this area and asking me what to do with their own personal finance when I hadn't heard from them in, say, in years past. And my advice to them was to stay the course. And the market decline over 5 weeks from mid-February to mid-March was incredibly swift, a 35% decline in the stock market. We've actually already bounced back 30% from that March 23rd low. And it's because, a lot of it is that fiscal and monetary stimulus, people recognizing that the economy will reopen, and maybe also some hope in terms of, can we get therapeutic intervention or vaccine progress along those lines? So there are things to be hopeful about. And so I would say that's important.
Thank you. Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna Campbell. I'm the Senior Program Officer at the Howard Gilman Foundation. I'm really happy to be here today, she, her, hers. I'm representing the perspective of philanthropy, and I was thinking about that this morning, and it's a hard boulder to carry because philanthropy is not a monolith. Like, there are many theater companies, there are many different philanthropic institutions, all with their own mission. But what we do share is a model. The philanthropy exists to give generously to public to charity, I would say, and good causes. So I would certainly promote theater as a good cause, as well as the broader performing arts ecosystem. And I think right now the challenge for philanthropy is how to step up in a moment of crisis, where we see a lot of our grantees and the field that we serve struggling institutionally and individually as much as we are individually. And I think another thing that's important to remember is that philanthropy is run by humans, and humans are suffering across the board with COVID. I think there are certainly cases to be made, or obvious cases where certain individuals suffer more than others, but philanthropy isn't run by robots or formulas. We're humans too. And so I think another challenge for philanthropy at this moment is to remember that we're working with humans who need this support. The nonprofit sector is really built with contributed income as a part of its regular business. It's part of the regular business model. So this is an important time for philanthropy to recognize that and to really evaluate how it can best support its constituents. I would say personally, it occurred to me also this morning that my former life was as a ballet dancer, and one of the main reasons I left that was because I was tired of being hungry and poor. So now I see all of these brilliant artists, struggling with the day-to-day, who might not have had that challenge had COVID not come to our doorstep. So I feel very close to that struggle. I'm married to an artist, and so the two of us have kind of lived through this on a personal level as well as a professional one. So we're all together. I think what I would love to get out of this conversation is the network and the collaboration that I think all these different perspectives need to have. One of the ways philanthropy can work best is when we really understand what our grantees need. And so that's what we can get when we talk and we communicate and we have these types of salons and can share our ideas. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Raz.
Hi, everyone. I'm Raz Golden. Pronouns are he, him, his. I am a freelance director based in New York City. I worked all over the East Coast and a lot in Pittsburgh. And also I would call myself an on-again, off-again nonprofit administrator. So I've worked in theaters and art museums and history museums. So kind of from both sides of that proverbial divide or connection. I think I come at this professionally as a freelance director, as a freelance artist, thinking about how not only did COVID create new problems for artists and for artists financially in this world, but I think about how we need to pay attention to how it exacerbated the financial problems that artists had in building careers before COVID hit us. I think about the fact that for all the artists who are hit, and especially for emerging artists, people of color, and artists without access to generational wealth, that the structures that were in place before haven't allowed many artists to prepare for something like this. The way that sort of low pay in the industry, instability in hiring, the high barrier of access has created things where people can't save for something like this. So in the present, right now, I am one of the directors, one of the artists that's benefited from one of the numerous emergency relief funds. I specifically the Director's Emergency Relief Fund through the Drama League, and there are so many different funds for different artists: the Actors Fund, the Artist Relief Fund, and these are really, really great present systems that we put in, that we kind of all came up to create as a community to support us, and that's really, really amazing. But a part of me thinks about the fact that where would we be, and what have we been doing that necessitates such a need, that people weren't able to have the money and have the stability that would bring them into a crisis like this, and they would be less sort of desperate in that way. I mean, just the sort of, for me personally, emerging artists and artists who are building a career, and even beyond that, they have several revenue streams. You're making money from your supplement, you're primarily from your artwork. I've worked as a director and assistant director, from grants and fellowships, and then from supplemental income, whether that be teaching or admin work, or a lot of people in the service industry. And with COVID-19, pretty much all of that is gone. I know I have many friends, I've had many conversations with friends who work in the service industry, and as in sort of the early days of COVID, we were realizing that we weren't prepared for something of this scale to really destroy everything and destroy all of our revenue streams, and trying to figure out how to survive in that has been something that's been very important to me, and the conversations that me and my colleagues have been having. I think also, on another personal note, I have much of my family and many of my colleagues are people who either can't or don't take part in the formal economy. And so these are people who are not getting reached by the stimulus check. These are people not getting reached by unemployment. And I wonder, and so many of that those people are artists. And I wonder what we can think about. And as audience members, I hope we take away thinking about these people and thinking about how we can support them, and what are the structures and the ways we can change to support them. I think what I hope in general is that we think about, once this is over and once we're on the other wave, how do we create the structures that support artists so that the next inevitable act of God doesn't bring us back here. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Raz. Thank you. Let's do a big roll call. There are 56 participants here. Will you type in like the perspective that you're holding, if you're an administrator, if you're an actor, where you're at, and then maybe just tell us where that is, and then comma, and then maybe a word or two of like what you're seeking. And go ahead and do that right now in the chat. You can chat to everybody. It says everyone. And then if you have particular questions as we go along, you are free to private chat me, Mei Ann, your questions for these incredible folks who are here as well. So go ahead and type that in. And what we can do is you can see in the chat everybody who's here. What we're going to do next is Arnie Burton is going to read an excerpt from Lewiston, and we're going to gather around that text. Go ahead, Arnie.
Hi. Ready? Alice, for almost 20 years, my dad and I lived in houses that were less than 30 feet apart from one another. I saw him almost every day. If you were to ask me about my relationship before he died, I would have said that we have a great relationship. We were very close. It wasn't until after he died that I found out what was really going on. That every day when I'd go to work, he'd head on down to the casino and he gambled away his savings. He took a loan out on the house, borrowed from 3 or 4 cousins, but I didn't know that. I'd go over there almost every night. I'd bring him groceries. I'd make him dinner. And I had no idea. And now, if you were to ask me about my relationship with my dad, I would say that there was an ocean between us. And it was on me too. I never allowed him to really know me either. I only showed him the parts of myself that wouldn't bother him, that were acceptable. So that was from Lewiston, Clarkston by Sam Hunter, the brilliant Sam Hunter. And I have to say, this piece, we did this at the Rattlestick a year and a half ago. And Sam's writing, Sam writes about people that, he writes about people that are in Idaho. He writes about mostly lower middle class people, people just getting by, people that are faced with this. It's in some way their lifestyle is faced with constantly dealing with money issues and the lack thereof, and being underrepresented. And personally, because I'm from Idaho, so his writing and his material speaks so much to me. And it was funny because when we were working on this play in rehearsal, because I grew up not far from where this play takes place in Lewiston, Idaho. And I asked my sister, I go, why did we leave the White House when we were growing up? And she goes, you had no idea? I go, no. She goes, Dad had a gambling problem, and he lost the house, and we had to move out. And I had no idea. My family was very much represented to this. My dad was a butcher, and we always were just getting by. And as an actor itself, it's so funny because I find, part of being an actor is the acceptance. It's funny to watch. It's not funny, but to see people, because as actors, we make a pact early on that we are going to be okay with not knowing, because we have to. We have to. If we don't make that pact and say it's okay that I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 2 months' time, 3 months' time. We're itinerant workers. It's like the job is going to end in a few months and we're going to move on to something else. And we're just going to have to trust that another job is going to be there. So there's a part of me that's very used to this. It's very used to saying, I don't know what's going to happen. We're just going to see. And the first month of all of our quarantine was actually kind of nice. It's like I didn't have to think about the business. I didn't have to, because we're all in this together. There's no business to think of. I have to say, lately though, I've had some darker days, and I think it's caught up to me how scary it is, because timeline keeps getting pushed back, and you start wondering, like, well, will it come back? How can it come back? And there's all these variables, and it's suddenly very scary.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your family's history and the own vulnerability of the contract. And I want to look at Jolene Noel had a question, like, how do we create more sustainable systems for the long-term health and wealth of freelance artists? Can we change that contract? Is it possible for us to change that contract? Who has changed that contract? What does that look like? Anna, Jason, Raz, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll jump in quickly. I appreciate what Arnie said about just making that contract with yourself being okay to not know what's coming next. I think that's very scary for a lot of people. So being able to embrace that, I think, has been required, at least, under our current circumstances. But if this crisis has done anything, it's forced us all to kind of reimagine and look again at what we've built. Raz talked about this too. There are a lot of problems with what we've built. And so this is a time to take on a really big challenge. I can't predict what exactly is going to change first, or if everything will change. But in terms of individual artists or freelance artists, there are quite a few philanthropic institutions and organizations that do make grants to individuals for the work that they're doing. Does everybody get a grant? No. Are those grants enough to live the rest of your life? Probably not. But there are structures in place already that could at some point in time be more robust, that could kind of feed into the larger ecosystem, whatever it ends up looking like. But part of that ecosystem includes organizations and venues where this work can happen. So we can't forget about those pieces at the same time.
And I just want to say too that people go into the theater it's not to make money. It's not kind of the driving force. Of course, we want to and we need to. But again, we go into this knowing, because we could, all of us living in New York and doing theater, off-Broadway theater, could have moved to Los Angeles if it was just about making money. And organizations like the Rattlestick, that when we did Lewiston, Clarkston, they purposely limited the audience to 50 people because they wanted an intimate experience. They wanted an experience for that, and they could have said, well, let's cram more people in, more seats. But the beauty of what they did and what institutions and off-Broadway theaters like the Rattlestick does is put the art a lot of times before money. The art and the experience is the priority. But of course, we have to make money too. But I did want to just say that the kind of driving force behind a lot of actors, but the organizations themselves, especially off-Broadway, is the experience. And we just have to find ways to keep supporting them so they can do that.
I wanted to broaden it out, and just, much of what we're talking about is bigger than artists, and how, we all know that, our society has been becoming more and more unequal in terms of the distribution of wealth for decades, right? And before this crisis, if you go back a year or two, the Federal Reserve did a big survey, and they determined that more than half of American households didn't have, $500 in the bank. So if something broke on their car, they couldn't fix it, that kind of thing. We weren't prepared for an emergency like this, across much of the economy. And I'm encouraged, at least, that, people are talking about this. And when you look at the CARES Act, the $2 trillion stimulus, unemployment was broadened in a way to sort of touch gig workers. So they were included in a way that they hadn't been included before, because so much of our economy is now a gig economy. And in the debate about, the next tranche of stimulus, one of the things that's being discussed is, how we can sort of perhaps directly digitally reach all of, people that weren't reached by the prior stimulus checks because they haven't been filing tax returns and things like that. There's actually interest on both sides of the aisle for that one. So it's at least being discussed and approached, but of course we have a long way to go.
I'd like to say just on the couple of the practical terms that, I'm not the first person to say this, but a lot of people have sort of said it, is that things like state minimum wage has to be just more of a thing for all theaters and for all theater practitioners, from the intern up. Unpaid internships, things like that, and the way people get started are not conducive to entry into the arts world, and not conducive to building any sort of stability and wealth. And then I would say that in a less practical term and more of a ideological term, in theater we have to sort of stop romanticizing poverty in a way that we sometimes do. I'm a frequenter of Twitter, and I've seen a couple of prominent artistic administrators in New York City sort of reminisce about their time when they were just starting out and how poor they were. And as someone who's only maybe 4 or 5 years away from having been out of that section of my life, I think it's not romantic at all. And the fact that it's still happening and people are still living on the edge of poverty when they're spending 40 hours, 60 hours a week in a theater, that's something we need to address both practically and ideologically.
And I think that we should look at also the demographics of those artists and who gets to, continue the art because of a trust fund, and what that looks like on the whole of what then are the artists that are able to sort of be able to step into the things that are being supported. And, that's really linked to Raquel Almazan's question of what is the responsibility of larger institutions to uphold their staff and artists, and how are salaried artistic directors who make over 100,000 going to reflect hiring freelancers and low-paid artists? And I would add to that the sort of way in which a lot of big organizations are talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and where those are actually going in this pandemic, and how systems are going to support that to continue to happen instead of it being put on the sideline once again, when the most vulnerable of our communities are the Black and brown bodies that are suffering at the front lines. All of that is actually making all of that inequity even more clear. And I'm so how are we doing that? How are we actually taking reparations seriously in this moment? And how are philanthropic organizations, donors, all of us, people in power, stepping up to that? That's for Anna.
Sorry. I think that's a great question. I have the same question, honestly. I mean, like I said in the beginning, every philanthropy is a little bit different. I can't speak for the rest of the private foundations in the United States. All I can speak for is the Howard Gilman Foundation. I know that this has been a topic that's been discussed for years. You know, equity, diversity, inclusion. It's been talked upside down and sideways, and progress is slow. And I don't think it's lacking. I think it's slow. But like the conversations we're having around capitalization and properly financed institutions to do their work in the best way possible, those conversations are also slow. But this rapid landscape shift that's really affected everybody in one way or another, there's opportunity. And, you know, we have to seize that opportunity. I know at Gilman, we are very intent on crafting strategy and opportunities to move forward in the best way we can. But it's just as for everybody else, it's so, it feels almost too soon to predict what the needs are going to be. We know what the needs are today, but what are they going to be tomorrow? We have to juggle all of these things to do something that makes the most sense for our grantees and for the field. So I see it as an opportunity. I don't have the magic answer, but I think this is how philanthropy is considering its role moving forward in the broadest sense, and I know it is for Gilman too.
Thank you. I mean, something that Raz said that is really sitting with me is how, like, we know what's going to happen actually because we are seeing now what has always been. Mm-hmm. That there is a deep knowledge of seeing very clearly the structures of society, and they're just getting exacerbated. I mean, yesterday, the 8 most wealthy men got much wealthier. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about collapse, we're talking about sort of this kind of thing, but it's always sort of been there, right? And at the same time, you know, I go back to Ursula Le Guin. You know, she said, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable, but so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begin in art, and very often in our art, the art of words." And in sitting with that, I'm thinking about the systems in which, like, how are we changing, and what systems can we recognize right now that are actually doing that? You know, what are the things that we see about that? Troy Anthony just also added, "I hear a lot of people talking about looking to the field to know what to do, what's next. Who are we talking to know what the needs are?" That's fantastic. Roger Feather Kelly also just wrote something for Dance Magazine, which is like, are you talking to the artists? Are we talking to the artists? I filled out so many surveys. I feel like I'm kind of being talked to in a way, but like how, you know, like, yes, like how do we talk about what the needs are and how do we figure out how to meet those needs? Something I'm seeing that's really beautiful in Singapore and in New York are these documents that I think are so powerful, where people are offering something, like people who offer something and people who are asking for their needs to be met. From grassroots organizations like Okra Project, Ansfield Stewart, they basically were like, who needs $100? If you're a Black trans woman, I'm gonna get you this need right away here. Art equity. This is how philanthropy should be done. Art equity trains people in diversity, equity, inclusion. They have been training people for 5 years. I was in the first cohort. And we received a note that a major donor wanted to support the people who are doing the work of social change and art. And they went to the people who are doing the training of the people who are doing social change and art and said, we're gonna offer you, anyone who asks for it gets it. And then they also said, anyone who you say we should give it to, any organization you say we should give it to, because you are in the know, you are at the center of the hub, we're gonna give it to them. The application took a minute, please, like a minute. And because they know us, it's part of a network of a community that you are building, training, investing in. And then when things like this happen, you're able to sort of pick up and run with and go. And so Mike, for me, I'm like, how are we building those networks? How are we building that resilience of knowing who we're supporting and how we can actually like build those networks while providing access so that it's not just a club again, you know? And like, and that's what I'm excited about. Like, and like, what are things, what are ways in which people are working right now? And people, you're welcome to put that in the chat too, and do it for everyone to hear. If you know people who are doing amazing things and organizations that are doing things, put it in there. Like, go ahead, let's flood this with the inspiration of people who are doing it, because they are. Jack, I'm gonna keep going. Jack, Alec Duffy, and Jordana de la Cruz. Jack, that portal for brilliant Black witches of the theater who are changing everything. Their space is now a hub for food distribution. How did that happen? A board member was part of that network. They asked the board member, this person, to be a board member because she was an activist and a dancer, and they thought, we need this on our board. We need to change this from the top down. And then when times got hard and things happened, an immediate, direct way of meeting the community.
I just want to say I love that, and I one thing that makes me really think about is the thing that makes those things happen is trust, and trust in that. It feels like before COVID-19, when you wanted to get some sort of grant or financial assistance, whether that was for professional or personal use, there was 10 steps to get through, and 50 million different pieces of proof that you deserve this money. And with COVID-19, we've been forced to truncate those processes because there's been so much emergency and for people to need it. And I think that's maybe something that we can look at keeping as we move out of the emergency mode, and making sure, and if you are giving out money and if you're giving something, you understand that the application alone, the act of asking, is a barrier of entry unto itself, and that you should find a way where you can find people you trust and people in order to help you distribute it, and make that a lot more streamlined, and make sure you can get people to come. It just has to be, people just have to trust each other that the money you're giving out or the money you're taking is going to be used in the way that it should be.
I'll just jump in quickly and say that at Gilman, we did do that with our grant application. We turned it into one question, which I think we were all pretty excited about. And it was basically, how does COVID affect you and your organization? Because we knew if we get on the phone with these folks, all we're going to talk about is what COVID is doing. So, we didn't need to ask all those other questions, especially since we've created relationships with a lot of our grantees. We don't need to repeat ourselves. But Raz, I think you're exactly right. I agree that, we don't need to carry over old systems into a new reality. And, we at Gilman really want to figure out how to best use this time to refashion what 2021 might look like. And again, we only fund organizations, but I think the vibe in the field is very much around, taking what we're learning today to best support, whatever our new reality will be. And hopefully that includes a lot shorter grant applications.
Yeah. What do you feel, our panelists, like, what do you see in the future? That, like, how do you imagine our future?
Well, I would like to think that, of course, that's the optimist side of me talking right now, that we'll have all gone through a very cathartic period and asked ourselves some tough questions, and questions about society at large, and we're going to come out of this smarter, more emotionally intelligent, and this will be one of those times where something very tough to go through has led to kind of a renaissance of voices, of talent, of understanding. That's on my good days. On my bad days, when I'm despairing about human behavior, and I see, depending on what I'm reading in the news, I go, well, we'll learn nothing from this. But I do think my optimistic side prevails, and that we can't help but have learned something from this. And I think theater will be stronger. I think also it's one of those things where you don't know what you miss until you lose it, and you see it from people all the time on all the theater online stuff of people, of an audience just desperately any content for theater because they miss it so much. And it's up to us too to really be an advocate and say why theater is essential and why it is an essential business. And we have to be our own best spokesman and really not be apologetic for what we do and the line of work we do, and say why it is essential.
So from the broader economy, what I'm very much expecting is for us to build more resilience into our economy. And I see that happening two ways. So one is, this really has rocked sort of companies' supply chains, whatever business you're in. It's become harder to sort of get your goods to market. And this comes after another thing that's been going on for decades, is that businesses have been thinking about how to produce things more efficiently, and rather than thinking about how to make sure that they can sort of deliver when it needs to be delivered. So they're going to change from only caring about efficiency and low cost to beginning to produce things closer to where they're consumed and build resilience to the supply chain and hold safety stocks. That's one big change that we're going to see. I'm pretty confident of that. You hear that across the board from CEOs of every kind of company. And the other thing that I'm definitely expecting, in a way that I expect us to become more resilient, is that we're going to have another big piece of legislation in the next year or two. And I would compare it to the Dodd-Frank legislation after the financial crisis. That was passed in 2010. And it changed banking a lot, such that going into this crisis, actually our banks are sort of a source of strength. They're very well capitalized. No one's worried that they're going to fail, and they're able to sort of help. And so in the same way, I expect to see big pandemic resilience legislation, all kinds of healthcare stockpiling of goods. Maybe the way after the Great Depression, we had an FDIC that promised and kept the deposits, sort of a fund like that. I expect to see funds to make sure that airlines and retail stores and other places, if they ever have to close again, there'll be sort of money put aside rather than having to do the kind of thing that we're doing now on an emergency basis. So these are some of the things I think that we should expect and hope for.
I'll go next. I think the theater landscape, and this is a foundation member speaking, not a practicing theater artist, but what I expect to see across the performing arts is a bit of a reshuffling. While artists may get other jobs for the interim, artists aren't going to go away. You're an artist. You're not going to lose that part of you. The work will continue in one way or another. I've been really heartened to hear a lot of theater artists talk about their welcome of limitation and the restrictions put on them as a source of creativity. That might not be true for everybody, but it's nice to hear that it can continue the work. The work can continue. I think the landscape has changed, and how it settles, we'll see. But this, like I said before, is a real opportunity for us to help it settle in a way that becomes more of what we envisioned it to be even just a month ago.
I see the next, building on that, I see the next year, the next maybe year or two being a year of very, very safe work and very, very dangerous work. And I just wonder where individual artists and organizations will fall on that. Because in one way, it's we're trying to rebuild whatever we had before, but in another way, we're trying to just take the opportunity that some things have been destroyed to just build something new. And so I'm in many ways excited for that.
I feel like Raz, you bring it up again, like what did we have before? And what are we returning to, and what are we bouncing back to, and how? And I think about how terrible it is that people are dying. And I feel I was so scared about my own family, right? And I actually told my parents, I was like, you are not allowed to die. I'm not ready for you to die. And I deeply understand that we are holding a lot of this. And all the people who are out of work, airline industry and all of that. And also the ozone layer is healing. And also we were hurtling towards extinction. That's what we were doing. That's what we are doing. And there's such a powerful thing to understand about climate justice that hasn't been actually paid any attention to, and how linked that is to all of these intersections, and what it is to have an understood of the magnitude of the problem beyond COVID. We actually didn't even understand the magnitude of the problem. And I'm not sure we even do now, because of how we constantly talk about bouncing back and what that means for our Earth that we live on. Yes, more climate crisis art. There's a really great question that Victor Cervantes says, that's like Rattlestick fam right there, Victor. And a question that Victor asks is, are there recommendations for resource sharing on a national platform? Are there organizations or platforms that are creating these cross connections? I know that there are amazing things that are being done in terms of different communities and how they're wrangling people together to even think about how we build solidarity and community. The Indie Theater Fund is doing some amazing work with that and a lot of the programming that they're offering. And I would say that the anti-Asian racism town hall that has been organized, I think they're in their second round now. These are people who are thinking about things that are related to everything that we're talking about, because all of this is all completely related to each other. Racial justice is related to economic justice, climate justice, all of that. And if there are people who know more resource sharing, please shout that out to Victor as well. I want to offer Michael Early the space to introduce himself and also offer us some.
Okay, I have to figure out how to. Have I been unmuted? Yes. I'm still navigating. I'm really a Luddite, so here we go. My name is Michael Early. It's lovely to see you all. I don't know very many of you, but happy and all that stuff. And yeah, it's continues to be surreal. I'm an actor and educator, and I got this email from Daniela, and Raz and I go back a bit, a summer ago, and I'm going to read something that he asked me to read, which is from Timon of Athens, and it's Act 1, Scene 2. Oh, no doubt, my good friends, but the gods themselves have provided that I shall have much help from you. How had you been my friends else? Why have you that charitable title from thousands? Did not you chiefly belong to my heart? I have told more of you to myself than you can with modesty speak in your own behalf. And thus far, I confirm you. Oh, you gods, think I, what need we have any friends if we should ne'er have need of them? They were the most needless creatures living, should we ne'er have use for them, and would most resemble sweet instruments hung up in cases that keeps their sounds to themselves. Why, I have often wished myself poorer, that I might come nearer to you. We are born to do benefits, and what better or properer can we call our own than the riches of our friends? Oh, what a precious comfort 'tis to have so many like brothers commanding one another's fortunes. O joys e'en made away ere it can be born. Mine eyes cannot hold out water, methinks. To forget their faults, I drink to you. Thank you.
Raz, thank you so much, Michael. Raz, you brought that to the fore. Will you share with us why?
Yeah, so as many of you might know, that Timon of Athens is a tragedy. So it does not go well for Timon by the end of the play. But when we were talking about theatrical pieces that speak to money and the way money affects relationships and how we think about money today, I kept thinking about Timon and how he views his relationship as a philanthropist to the artists around him in the first act. And he reviews their friendship and their community as valuable as his money, and he sees them as equal. And so my hope for everyone, and as we think, is that we remain in Act 1 of Timon, at least from Timon's view, in the idea that our community is as valuable as our financial connections.
Anybody else want to add to that?
Thank you. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I would say, you know, this is going to be every time there's a recession, it's a challenge where, you know, people sort of the total giving in the country goes down just because people are worried about their own situations, or they don't have the ability to that they had the year before. But it doesn't go away, and so you know, the value that people see from whether it's, you know, Timon and his artists or other causes that people feel like it's important to give to, you know, it didn't go away before and it won't go away again.
Yes, and how do we actually access that place of generosity in this time where we all feel incredibly stretched to our limit? I know that Daisy had a question about that too, as a designer. Like what are some sustainable things? So I'd like just to take a minute with you and be able to sort of breathe into a gratitude practice, because that has been the thing that has moved me from the scarcity to abundance. And until we can actually have that, like, yes to righteous anger and yes to changing the system, but may our bodies be taken care of deeply in understanding that they hold the axe, that they are actually the thing that is the axe. Our very bodies are the hope towards being able to make action towards change. So I'd like you just to feel your feet on the ground. Take a breath. Feel that energy go all the way right down into the center of the earth, so far down. And let the string above your head just pull your head so that you are a channel of light. And if you could imagine the one thing that you can be grateful for today, acknowledging all the things that we want to be able to change for collective liberation. And hold that which you are grateful for as a seed. And if you would like to share that in the chat, please do so. Grateful for having time to stretch every day. Grateful for people to care for and cared by. Grateful for this time together. Grateful for the power and collective liberation. Grateful for community on a global scale. Grateful for clarity in my values. Gratitude for opportunities to just air out thoughts. The ability to help people. Grateful to Rattlestick for creating community at times when we cannot in person. I feel fed by this gathering. Thank you for that poem. I'm going to offer the gratitude to all of you who came and showed up to face this time. I hope that this will not be the last thing we can share together. Keep following the series of powerful conversations that Rattlestick is doing. And if you're able to, donate to Rattlestick because they're doing amazing work. I'm going to pass it back to Daniela.
Thank you all so very much, and a special gratitude to Mei Ann, who's doing this at 4 a.m. from Singapore. Our amazing artists and panelists, Arnie, Michael, Jason, Anna, and Raz, and to all of you. And next week, we are talking about end-of-life care. So it is going to be focused on people who are dealing with mourning and grieving and how to support one another. So we hope you will join us then. And I feel really grateful once again for all of you. So thank you for your leadership, Mei Ann, and for all of you. And please be safe and stay healthy. Thank you all so very much.